Okay, today we've got the Celerity Technologies Fibre Optic HDMI cable. In this case it's a 200 foot or 60.9 meter cable, and this is how it comes. Notice a reel with a couple of ends on it. Within the product you'll have obviously the box here. You have an instruction manual, and you have a couple of ends that will explain. One will be marked R for receiver end or TV end, and T will be marked for the source end or the transmitter end. So there's two parts, and we'll explain that in a moment. So very few limitations on fibre optic, and most purists will like the standard. You can run up to 1,000 feet or 305 meters in the pre-made configuration, but a whole bunch of options are available. We can also custom make the fibre optics, but Celerity do that, and we'll explain why soon. It basically supports everything: HDMI, 4K, 1080p, 36-bit color depth. So yeah, as far as video standards, everything that we can see within current standards is supported. We'll explain why this product is also very particular in that it should have an ability to be supported not just today in the technologies that we know about, but in the future in the sense of things that we don't yet know about. So I'll explain that in a moment. One interesting feature also, which is not common, is ARC, so audio return channel. So it's in that situation where you've got a TV at one end and an AV receiver at the other end. It can actually send the audio in both directions. Just make sure obviously that HDMI socket is marked ARC, A-R-C. So going into the product, what have we got? It's quite hard to see, but a lot of people will think that that's a mini USB, and some might think that it's a micro HDMI. It actually is neither. Celerity have a kind of custom connector at the end of the cable. The thing to note is just how small everything is. If I had to guess a gauge of that cable, I'd probably say it's maybe a 40 gauge or so. So it's extremely it's extremely small, and the head of the connector also is amazingly small. In the past, with the fibre optics, I haven't seen a situation where you can actually have such a small end of the connector. Obviously, I haven't searched a great deal for that, but you'll also notice that these ends are marked R for the receiver end or the TV end, and the other end is marked T. So when these little dongles, you remove the cover, and then we have our HDMI plug. Both ends have covers, which is great, especially if you're working in a rough environment. It's a lot tougher for those situations. So you just insert it in the end of the receiver end. Just make sure it snaps in. Yeah, you might find that you haven't quite pushed it in properly, so just make sure it's snapped in. And then you have this USB. So this is a powered connection. You only actually need to provide power at the receiver end, which is actually really convenient because most TVs will have a USB. So you plug in your HDMI here, the USB, you plug into the USB socket on your TV, and that's all the power that you need. You have exactly the same configuration at the transmitter end, but you don't actually need to plug in that USB, so it's quite convenient. So getting power to over this method of sending HDMI shouldn't be an issue. The other thing to note is most fibre optics is very delicate. They've been quite smart in putting this little end on it because obviously it's going to protect the fibre optic. So you have the fibre optic, and then you have a little circuit board, and then this end of the connector, which is quite robust. And obviously when you've got a cover also over it, then that adds to that. The other thing is the cable's actually quite strong. If you have a look at the specifications, it's 60 pounds pull strength, which is about 30 kilos, so it's quite strong. And you'll also notice a marking on the cable saying it's, what do you call it, plenum, which is basically a fire rating. So when you're putting it into commercial jobs, you know, the situations of flame and fumes and all of that kind of stuff should be covered. So obviously in a commercial environment you don't want fires to spread over the cabling, and this is sort of a standard that you have for a lot of cables. Good Cat 5s, good RG6s should all be fire rated. So yeah. Also, the other thing, particularly for commercial jobs, is just how small this is. You'll notice a lot of fibre optics, you're going to have this little connector, and it'll appear actually just like that. And if you check with most manufacturers, they'll say you can't actually remove the two. So in the case of Celerity, you can actually remove the head and pull it through a very thin conduit. So it makes it a lot easier to run your cables. Now, as far as also a couple of other commercial applications, and in occasions domestic applications, there's a massive amount of bandwidth. It's over 16 gigabits a second, so that means that as far as future proofing goes, we're in a good position. Fibre optic also, not having copper in it, is completely EMI free. So if the cable's passing by motors or something that'll emit a lot of electromagnetic interference, it's going to be completely immune to that, being fibre optics, and that's a part of the reason why you're going to get these huge cable distances. Now, the other cool thing about having this system where you have these end connectors is that if new standards come out and HDMI changes, which will always happen with technology, Celerity is saying that they have the potential to supply different heads of the connectors. So once a cable's been run, it should be a matter of changing these heads over, in 10 years time, for the new standard, and then clipping it straight back in and off you go. So yeah, that's the ultimate in future proofing. So yeah, and in my testing, I had a setup with an Apple TV and 1080p content. The other thing also about this fibre optics is I noticed no difference in the picture between a standard passive HDMI lead, which was in this case 2 meters, and this one. All right, so that's it. If you've got any comments, please post any comments down below. We're going to be adding a lot of information online as much as possible. Yeah, and thanks for tuning in.